The CuffPort by the Giver. As dawn broke on that snowy evening, Officer Barry and Hendo stood at the entrance of the Segregation Unit. The chill of the concrete walls seeped into their bones. Barry couldn't shake the thought of the tasks set forth by their captain during roll call and the strict policies they had to adhere to while serving Chow that day. Barry inhaled deeply, bracing himself for the challenges ahead. The atmosphere within the facility was thick with a blend of anxiety and defiance, a familiar yet unsettling presence in the Segregation Unit. Inmates were confined due to behavior issues or serious infractions. Each cell had a story of myriad reasons for their confinement, and Barry and his partner, Officer Hendo, prepared themselves for the unpredictability that awaited them with every encounter. As they stepped inside, the fluorescent lights flickered above them. In harsh glare on the gray walls, they walked down the narrow corridor, the sound of their boots echoing against the concrete. Eyes peered out from behind metal bars, some filled with resentment, others with a desperate hope for connection. Barrett had learned to read those gazes. Some inmates were simply marking time, while others were plotting their next move. "Good morning, Officer BDR," which stood for Barry Do-Right, a voice called from one of the cells. It was Johnson, a long-term inmate known for his sharp tongue and quick wit. "Back for another round of fun?" Barry managed a half-smile, knowing that banter was part of the routine. "Just doing my job, Johnson. You know it's chow time." Johnson then asked if he can have another sack, and Barry says, "Keep it down, or I have to remind you about the privileges you already get. As per captain, today we are no longer able to do that." The inmate laughed, the sound echoing eerily in the enclosed space. Barry continued his rounds before passing Chow, mentally cataloging the behavior of each inmate. Today the stakes were definitely higher than usual. Barry and Hendo knew that they had to use the feed box, whether they wanted to or not. This was a protective barrier against what was inmates called gutted down. This tactic involved hurling feces at officers, a grotesque form of rebellion that had left more than one colleague covered in filth. While using the box would slow him down, making the chore of passing out meals would feel more drawn out, it could also shield them from a very and a humiliating attack. Without using the feed box, chow could be done on all 8 ranges within 1 hour. However, today wasn't the day to try that out because they were already irritated. So while using the feed box, Barry and Hendo start passing out chow. They start turning on the lights of all the irritated inmates that were kicking the door, and they were making remarks about wanting to do things to the officers. Some were even saying they wanted to flood their cells, and if they flooded their cells, they would flood the person across from them, next to them, and it'll make Barry and Hendo's job a lot harder. Officer Hendo, he wasn't one of those officers that'll let them say that and not do anything about it. So anytime anybody would say anything, Officer Hendo would immediately go over there and shut their water off. Their water would be shut off for 4 hours. Or every 4 hours, Officer Hendo or Officer Barry would have to go over there and turn the water back on. Other than that, the water would be off. But that's exactly what they did. Now they understood that this could provoke an immediate hostile reaction. The thought of what might greet him on the other side of the CuffPort sent a shiver down their spine. Even if they shut off the water, they didn't shut off the water. These people were still irritated. You did something to one of their buddies? Oh, they knew. So they had to be extremely careful today. Sometimes it was a desperate plea for mercy. Sometimes it was a flash of anger. The silence sometimes was just a mind unraveling. Each choice they made that night weighed heavily on their conscience. Some faces of the inmates flashed through their mind. Some pleading, others defiant, all trapped in their own narratives of regret and rage. Some hungry because they didn't receive enough rations that day because the person serving the chow did not have enough staff. So not only were we not allowing them to trade food anymore or receive extra sacks, sometimes their food wasn't even right. Now once the officers got to the 800 range, they reached cell 801. And 801 was Fox. He personified the very definition of a sly individual, as described by the Oxford Dictionary. Fox had a talent for outsmarting many officers, often leaving them in embarrassing situations. Before Officer Barry knew it, he could find himself covered in feces, unable to use his OC spray. Fox understood that all he had to do was stop his antics and comply, ensuring Barry wouldn't have justification to use force. For those unfamiliar, OC spray is an aerosol can that creates overwhelming effects. Imagine being trapped in a small room filled with onions, garlic, and cayenne pepper, struggling to breathe while battling a burning sensation in your eyes. Now, you would only get the full effect if the officers were able to get the spray on your eyes for 5 seconds. If not, the officers would just have to saturate the air with the OC spray, making the inmate unable to breathe. This was called cooking. So that day, when Officer Hendo and Barry went to feed Fox, he greeted them with a shit-eating grin. Now this, of course, was someone who Fox knew the light was coming on. So Officer Hendo and Officer Barry radioed to the pod officer to turn on the light. Once the light was on, it made things more clear to see Fox. Fox stood at the door, took his chow, and immediately took the opportunity to squirt a bag of feces on Barry and Hendo. Now, this CuffPort that he ironically had would not secure properly. This CuffPort was an unassuming flap of steel, allowing correctional officers to pass items to inmates locked in their isolated cells. This small opening served as a lifeline and a critical threshold between the controlled environment of the officers and the unpredictable chaos of the inmates. In this part of the prison, handing out meals was a gamble, the tension palpable as they prepared to slide the tray through. Even using the feed box, the inmates could still gun you down because you still needed to put a hand through the feed box on the side to close the flap. However, this CuffPort needed to be serviced. It took 2 officers with both of their hands to close this CuffPort. After not being gunned down, Barry kicked the CuffPort as if he was kicking an NFL football for a field goal. Surprisingly, Barry and Officer Hendo remained composed and decided to create a poop suit. This makeshift suit consisted of a one-piece garment with a trash bag over their vest and a splash shield over their face. They complemented it with a black pair of gloves. Fully in their clad poop suit, the officers instructed Fox to come to the door and cuff up. Fox didn't want to comply, as he was sitting on the bed eating his chow. So since Fox didn't comply, the officer sprayed on the side of the door, in the flap, the can of OC spray. They let Fox sit in there cooking for 5 minutes until Fox decided he was going to cuff up. The officers came back in the next 5 minutes and asked Fox, did he want to cuff up? Fox said no. So then the officers came back again. And on the 3rd time the officers came back, Fox was in there coughing up his lungs. So Fox definitely cuffed up. At this point in time, the entire range was aware of the situation. The inmates laughed like a pack of hyenas after placing Fox in the shower. Barry and Hendo searched Fox's cell and discovered a bottle of urine, prepared for the next prank of the unsuspecting officers. They confiscated this and other contraband, leaving both officers pondering as they escorted Fox back to his cell. Why would he do this? To their astonishment, Fox replied, I was paid to do that, and it was funny. Barry and Hendo exchanged incredulous glances, trying to wrap their minds around Fox's twisted sense of humor. Paid? Hendo asked, his voice a mix of belief and curiosity. By who? You think this is a joke? Fox simply chuckled, his eyes sparkling with mischief. Oh, you wouldn't believe the bets and deals that go down in here. You see, I'm not just a prisoner, I'm a businessman. A little chaos keeps things interesting, don't you think? As they walked back through the dimly lit corridors, Barry couldn't help but feel a twinge of admiration for Fox's audacity, even if it was a dangerous game. You got a real talent for trouble, you know that? He said half-jokingly. Talent is a strong word, Barry, Fox replied, flashing a grin that could charm the devil. I prefer to think of myself as a performer. You guys are my audience, and I'm just giving you a show. The laughter from the other inmates echoed down the hallway, a chorus of amusement that felt like a weight on Barry's shoulders. He hated being the butt of the joke, but he also understood the power of dynamics at play. In a place like this, with so little control, sometimes laughter was the only weapon the inmates had left. Once they reached the cell, Hendo took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. Look, Fox, this isn't a game. You can't just throw crap around and expect to get away with it. There are rules here. Rules? Fox scoffed, shaking his head. You know as well as I do that rules are just suggestions in this place. It's all about survival and having a little fun while you're at it. You should try it sometimes, Barry, Hendo. Life's too short to be serious all the time. With that being said, they shut the door of Fox's cell, the door clanging shut behind him. Barry and Hendo stood there for a moment, still processing the encounter. The absurdity of it all hung in the air like thick fog, and they shared a knowing look. Let's just keep an eye on him, Hendo finally said, breaking the silence. He's trouble, and trouble has a way of escalating. Barry nodded, still unable to shake off the strange blend of irritation and amusement he felt toward Fox. Yeah, and we'll have to be ready for whatever he actually pulls next. This isn't over. As they walked away, the laughter from the range faded into the background, but the chaos Fox created lingered in their minds, a reminder that in the world of inmates, the line between comedy and chaos was dangerously thin. The CuffPort by The Giver.